We all want our skin tones to look beautiful and creamy. We want our talent to look as best and as beautiful as they can, but that can be a challenge sometimes. And if that's something that you're struggling with, I know how you feel. So my goal is to help you to get natural, perfect looking skin tones with my secret method that is proven to remove the guesswork so that your results are spot on. Now the thing is, what makes perfect looking skin tones? Well, the way we'll want to define that and gauge how we're doing is by looking at their Luma, hue, and saturation. And the easiest way to do that is with the video scopes. Now it doesn't matter if you're using Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, or Final Cut Pro 10, the first trick in getting perfect skin tones is to isolate the skin with a shape mask so that we can see only those values in the video scopes, and all three programs will do that. Armed with that information, we'll then know what corrections to make and how to get the skin tones to be beautiful. Now, before diving deeper into this powerful method, let's review what the ideal values are for Luma, hue, and saturation for skin because these matter. Starting with the Luma, or the exposure of the skin, looking at the waveform, we want our skin tones to be in the 40 to 70 IRE range. That is this range here in the scopes. Ideally, the skin tones will cover this entire range from the shadowy areas of the skin to the highlights of the skin that are directly exposed by the light. Now, of course, there are exceptions depending on if you're working on a scene that is supposed to be almost pitch black, like a horror film with some kind of ghost or monster roaming around through the shadows. Then yes, we will be below this range. The next thing to consider is the hue of our skin. When evaluating skin hue, the vector scope is our best friend. I always like to have the flesh line or the eye bar turned on, and this is where the trace for the skin should generally lie. However, depending upon the complexion or the ethnicity of the person, there can be just a slight variation, but for the most part, we all have the same color of skin. Next comes saturation. Again, we use the vector scope as our guide. The further the trace extends from the center, the more saturation our skin has. So how much is the right amount of saturation for skin? Well, this also depends on the complexion of our subject. For pale skin tones, the trace should extend out between 20 and 30% away from the center. For medium or dark complexions, it'll be between 25 to 45%. And for golden skin tones, which are often people of Asian descent, it can be a range between 35 to 50%. Let's apply this method to some skin tones. We'll start first in Resolve. Here we have a guy in a suit talking on a cell phone. It's a nice close-up with lots of skin. Now, it's hard to look at this entire shot and to know what we need to do for the skin. So the simplest way to perfect the skin tones is to draw a power window or a shape mask around them to isolate just them in the video scopes. I'm taking my time to avoid the eyes, lips, and anything else that could be a distraction in the video scopes. Now let's enable the highlight feature. And voila! We can now only see the skin tones in our scopes. Looking in the Luma waveform, the trace for the skin is mainly in the 30 to 60 IRE range. That's not bad considering he's in the shade, so I think we can improve the exposure a little, so we'll bring up the gamma a bit, which is primarily where the skin tones lie. Now for the hue, let's take a look at the vector scope. You can see his skin is a little on the red side compared to the flesh line. Now you might be thinking, we need to set a complex key qualifier and isolate the skin. But instead, I'm going to show you an even easier and faster way to fix the hue of the skin by going to the hue versus hue curve. And with the eyedropper tool, we'll isolate the hues of the skin by clicking on them, and then we'll drag the middle point down. This swings the trace until it lines up more evenly on the line. That's better, but what's still bothering me is I think that there's a lot of skin tones that are still leaning towards red. That's likely due to the redness in his nose. So to address that, we'll simply widen the range and move those red and magenta tones closer to the flesh line. Of course, people's skin tones are never even, and that's okay, but this method can make those imperfections less obvious, and you can kind of think of it like adding makeup to our talent, and that makes you a hero. Finally, for the saturation, I would say that the trace extends around 40% from the center of the vector scope, and if you remember, I said for pale complexions, they should be between 20 to 30%. So let's remove some of that extra color by going to the hue versus sat curve, placing a point on the skin with the eyedropper and dragging down on the middle point to remove some of that color. All right, it's time to see the results. I'll disable the highlight feature and then the window. And let's take a look at the before and after. You can see how dark and reddish his skin was, and now how they look much more pleasing and natural. Now for our next shot in Premiere Pro. We'll use an opacity mask to isolate this guy's skin. In terms of exposure, I would say we are pretty good from 30 to 70 IRE. But what we really need to work on is the hue of the skin, which we can see is leaning towards yellow in the vector scope. I oftentimes will see this when people are near a window and there is green grass or foliage on the outside that is tinting the skin towards green. So to correct for this, we'll use the hue versus hue curve. We'll isolate the skin tones with the eyedropper and drag the middle point up until the trace aligns better with the flesh line. In terms of saturation, we are around 30% from the center, which falls in the 25 to 40% range for dark skin tones, so we're good on the saturation. Now we'll disable the mask and take a look at the before and after. Beautiful. That's a huge improvement. Look how green the skin tones were before our correction. He was looking sickly, and now we've returned him to optimum health. So just remember that grass and foliage can tint our skin tones green. Next, let's jump to Final Cut Pro 10. To isolate the skin, we'll use the draw mask effect and draw a mask avoiding the lips and eyes. For Luma, the trace corresponding to the skin tones begins at 10 IRE and goes up to 65 IRE. But the bulk of the trace is lower, so I think it could use a boost in exposure. We'll add a color wheels effect and bring the midtones up a bit. In terms of the hue, the trace is on the right side of the flesh line, meaning it is too red or magenta. So we'll add a hue saturation curves effect, isolate the skin with the eyedropper in the hue versus hue curve, and drag the middle point down, leaning it towards yellow until the trace aligns with the flesh line. Finally, golden skin tones should be around 35 to 50% from the center. So with the hue versus sat curve, I'll give a small boost to the saturation. Now let's see the before and after. Right on point. All right, these kinds of corrections may seem subtle at first, but they do make the difference in setting your films apart from others. You'll see that using a shape mask compared with the scopes and these ideals can really help us in getting creamy, beautiful looking skin tones, which is what you want for your talent and your films. Now, if you're into this and you want to get more results like this, I want to invite you to our free 1-hour online color grading workshop, where we dive into the fundamentals and reveal the kinds of tips and tricks you don't normally see on YouTube. If you want to find everything in one place, we'll also have a special offer for our Color Grading Academy at the end of the presentation for those who want to work with us more closely. Now, if that doesn't sound like you and a lot of this seems overwhelming, well, let me introduce you to the Cinema Grade plugin. With it, you can literally click on the skin tones and drag up or down to adjust their exposure. You can click and drag up or down to fine-tune their hue. And finally, drag up or down to dial in just the right amount of saturation. Plus, with Cinema Grade, you also get a false color mode for getting the right exposure on the fly, an incredible auto white balancing feature, real-time previews of LUTs, and X-Rite color checker chart support for doing automatic corrections. You'll see a link for Cinema Grade in the description below and a link for registering for the workshop. So check out these options for all your color grading needs. If we can help you to get the look of your films to stand out and land bigger projects or work in a bigger role, well, we want to see you do that and see you set your films apart. For more grading videos like this, click the subscribe button and then the bell to get notified of our next one. I'll see you in the next video. Let's make the grade.